Welcome to the third and last session of the day. So, in this session, we have Dr. Irfan Ali Abbas, advocate and part-time lecturer of OU. So, he'll be speaking on use of technology in dispute resolution and emerging trends. We all know Irfan sir is, but Irfan Ali Abbas, Dr. Irfan Ali Abbas is an advocate at High Court of Telangana with 10 years of standing, and he's also a part-time faculty at University College of Law OU since January 2019. He worked as assistant professor in Symbiosis Law School, Hyderabad in 2018 and was faculty in charge for ADR cell. He is a certified mediator and a member of IIAM Kochi. He has done his LLM in corporate laws and PhD in law in the area of online dispute resolution from Osmania University in 2019. He has done PG diplomas in cyber law, patent law from Nalsar University, PG diploma in ADR from ICADR Hyderabad, and GNIIT from NIIT. He has qualified UGC NET in law and was selected for ICSSR doctoral fellowship for PhD. He received Pratibha Award and scholarship for the LLB program from the AP state government. He worked as project fellow in UP Center for Advanced Research and Training, Government and Development in Osmania University. He was a subject expert, scriptwriter, and presenter for 14 video lessons recorded at EMMRCE, IFLU University, that is English and Foreign Language University, Hyderabad, for the subject of ADR for LLB program in NME ICT e-content development project of MHRD, and he's a teaching assistant for 3 SWAYAM online certificate courses on human rights, international law, and international humanitarian law, intellectual property rights and competition law, and Indian judicial system, legal aid and environmental protection offered by Professor Jibridi sir. And he has contributed to study material on family dispute resolution, recent trends and developments by Professor Jayakumar for PG diploma in FDR offered by Nal sir. Participated and presented papers in several national and international seminars, workshops. Sir, we welcome you for this session. Over to you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Nishit, for the nice words. And I will be starting my presentation with the help of my PPT. My topic for today is use of technology in dispute resolution, emerging trend. Now, first of all, before going into the details of the subject, I would like to first dwell upon certain basic concepts like what is a dispute, what are the components of a dispute, and what is dispute resolution, what are the different forms of dispute resolution, and then I will be dealing with the growth of technology, and then the significance of technology in dispute resolution, the legal dimensions in the international scenario, and the legal dimensions in the national scenario in India, and finally the emerging trends. So first of all, coming to what is a dispute. Now, dispute, the definition of a dispute is, in simple words, a difference of opinion, or whenever there is a quarrel, or when two parties are arguing against each other, where one of the party contends for one thing and the other party contends something that is diametrically opposite to it. So there is no universal or standard definition of a dispute. Whatever cases that we have, particularly civil cases, they are nothing but disputes in simple terminology. Whereas coming to criminal cases, they are called as offenses. But generally, in every criminal case, there may be an underlying dispute that is there. So as you see, there is the continuum of tension that is there. Now, how does a dispute come into existence? So first, as I said, in simple words, a dispute is a difference of opinion. So there are differences between the parties, which, if not resolved early, they may result into disagreement. The disagreement may result into problem. The problem may result into dispute. The dispute into conflict. Conflict into violence, and violence may result even in war. So this is the continuum of tension. So as such, dispute resolution, in order to be effective, not only involves resolving a dispute, but also involves two other factors. One is dispute avoidance, that is avoiding the dispute. And the second is dispute containment, that is containing the dispute from escalating any further. Now, in order to illustrate it, like for example, if there is a difference of opinion between two persons with regard to anything, regarding to collection, payment, repayment of debt, or payment of sale consideration, dispute between partners, dispute between a wife and husband, dispute between brothers with regard to partition, dispute between companies, etc. It may be at any stage of this continuum of tension. And if it is not contained at that stage, then it may escalate to the next stage, and then to the next stage. As such, it may become more difficult to resolve it if its escalation continues further. Now, dispute avoidance is actually to nip the dispute in the bud, like in order to provide where we can provide avenues, or where we can design mechanisms where the dispute does not arise at all. However, it is quite difficult. So, but dispute containment is very much essential. Now, next is the components of a dispute. Now we have seen how the escalation happens in a dispute, how the continuum of tension builds up. Now, what are the components of a dispute? According to Günther Gügel of Tübingen Institute of Peace Education, he is the director of the Institute of Peace Education. He has given an iceberg model to a conflict or dispute. Now, what is this iceberg model? Now, an iceberg is only 1/7 of an iceberg, is the tip of the iceberg, which is visible to us on the above the level of water. Like most of you might have seen the Titanic movie. Like if I remember iceberg, the Titanic movie, the way it crashes into the iceberg just flashes across me. So in that movie also, if you see the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg is that there is 1/6/7 of the iceberg in the bottom below the water. So he says, even in a dispute, the issues, the points of contention, the positions of the parties are only the tip of the iceberg. They are the only visible part of the dispute. But underlying it are the personalities, emotions, interests, needs, and desires of the parties, self-perceptions and self-esteem of the parties, hidden expectations of the parties, and unresolved issues from the past. That is the past baggage. So in order to effectively resolve a dispute, it is essential to address these issues which are hidden below the surface. That's what is the contention of Professor Günther Gügel. Now, what are these positions, interests, and needs? Now, if as the students of dispute resolution, we generally come across these terms. Now, if you see, generally in a dispute, there are two parties or two or more parties, but generally there are two sides to a dispute where they contest against each other. Now, each party has the position, interest, and need. Position is what the parties state, what they outwardly express, and interest is what they actually want, and needs are what they must definitely have. So generally what happens is the parties overstate their claims, or out of different reasons, like it may be ego, it may be overstating in order, in anticipation of reducing later, or it may be in order to harass the other party, not thinking about themselves, but the only contention or only objective being to subject the other party to more torture, etc., or loss. So in this case, like the positions are that are displayed above the level of the water. So these positions are nothing but the issues that are framed in the court. The written statement contain the positions. The interests are what are underlying it, what they actually want. Now let us say I want to give a simple illustration. Now there is one orange in the house, and there is a brother and sister who are quarreling for the orange. Okay. Now both of them come to their mother, who says, like, quarreling with each other that I want the orange, I want the orange. Now the mother says, actually asks, now the one way is to cut the orange in half and give it to both the parties. But here, even if that is done, both the brother and sister are not so happy. Then the mother asks, what do you actually want? Like, why are you not happy? Like, I have done it. No, I want, the brother says, like, actually he's a gym freak. Okay, he wants good muscles. So he wants the orange juice. And the sister wants to apply the peel of the orange to her face in order for her skin to glow better. So one of them wants the peel, the other wants the orange. And the need is, one wants more muscles, or one wants to become more strong, and the other wants a glowing, beautiful skin, or the other wants to appear to be beautiful. So here, if the needs were identified earlier, if the parties were asked, if the brother and sister, if the son and daughter were asked what they actually want, what their interest is, then it would have been a better resolution, where the peel could have been separated from the pulp, and the pulp may be given to the brother, and the entire peel may be given to the sister, the girl. So this is referred to as a win-win situation. Now this analogy, even though it is only a small analogy, this analogy can be extended to even real practical disputes in the market. Like, for example, where there are two pharmaceutical companies, and a pharmaceutical company wanted the egg shell, the shell of an egg of a rare bird which is very extinct, which is very rare. The species is almost extinct, and there is only one bird, there is only one egg in the jungles of Africa. Now, and one of the pharmaceutical companies wants the inside of the egg yolk and the white. So here also the same thing. Here the court, what it will do, it will divide it into half and may give it. But if we actually understand the interests of the parties, the needs of the parties, then the resolution may be better. So here, this is what is the area of common interest and needs, or a space for dialogue. If we are dwelling only on the positions, then this common interest and space for dialogue would not be possible. This analogy can be extended to family disputes, to labor disputes, to partnership disputes, to partition disputes, to disputes of recovery of money, recovery of rent, etc. Now, moving on, Thomas Kilmann has analyzed and divided the responses to a dispute into 5 types. That is, any response to a dispute generally falls into any of these 5 categories. What are those? Those are avoidance or avoiding, accommodating, competing, compromising, and collaborating. So he draws these 5 responses across 2 scales. One is assertiveness along the y-axis and cooperativeness along the x-axis. Now, assertiveness is assertiveness of that party, and cooperativeness is the cooperativeness of that party. Now coming to first, let us look at avoiding. Now, what is avoiding? Avoiding is withdraw from the situation and maintain neutrality. So the party is not at all looking at resolving that issue. It does not want to resolve. It just wants to withdraw from the situation. It wants to run away from the situation. So this may result in an impasse. Now, what is impasse means? Nothing but a situation of flux where there is no movement, and the parties are just stuck at one place. So this may not result, there may be no result at all in such kind of a situation. Now, next is accommodating. Accommodating is where one of the parties exceeds or accepts to the entire thing that is said by the other party in order to maintain harmony. Now, here in avoidance, the objective of the party who is avoiding is to maintain neutrality. And coming to accommodating, the objective of the party is to maintain harmony. Now, here the accommodating party may completely agree to whatever the other party is saying, and that may result, even though it may result in a win-lose situation. One party wins because this party completely agrees. This may happen in situations where the parties are faced against very powerful and influential party on the other side, like the Gundas or the corporate bigwigs, or it may be family relationships where they want to maintain a harmonial relationship, one of the brother or a sister or father or a mother, or it may be between partners where they want to completely agree to whatever the other party is saying in order to maintain harmony. But however, they are not happy with that. Okay, next is competing. Now, what is this competing? Competing is zero sum orientation or a win-loss power struggle, win-lose power struggle, where both the parties they are very much rigid and they want what they want. That's all. They do not want to budge from what they want. There is zero sum orientation, means there is no orientation of the party towards the demands or the requirements of the other party. So it will result in a win for one party and a lose for another party. So this is what happens in a court. In a court, if you see, the parties, the plaintiff and defendant, are fighting against each other tooth and nail. They just want to win, that's all. Next approach is compromising. Now, compromising is in which the parties look at what is minimally acceptable to me. Okay, what is the minimum that I may accept? That is the lower end, not the higher end, but the lower end of what they want. Okay, 50%, if I get also, it is enough. If I get 60% also, it is enough. No, not a matter. If I get 30% of whatever I am claiming, that is also enough. So this is what compromising is. So minimally acceptable to all, and relationships are undamaged. Generally, relationships, because both the parties, in compromise, both the parties reduce their demands to minimally acceptable, which are minimally acceptable to them, and come to a settlement. The final one is collaborating or integrative bargaining or collaboration. So here the parties expand the range of possible options in order to achieve win-win outcomes. So this is like the parties come up with innovative and creative solutions by expanding the pie. Now here, by expanding the pie, I mean they do not see the problem as a fixed solution to a problem. Like if there is a partition dispute between two brothers, let us assume, okay, and the elder brother wants the ground floor and the younger brother wants the first floor of the house. There are two floors in the house. There are only two sons, and they are Hindus. According to the Hindu law, they are equal. They are entitled to equal shares in the property. But however, the younger brother does not stay in that place, and younger brother stays at some other place. And the house property, let us say it is in Hyderabad, and the younger brother stays at Bangalore. He is a software employee. Now the elder brother has a large family. Okay, he has 4 children, and the children have set up their study rooms in the first floor, and he is residing in the ground floor. Now, if the parties go to court, what the court will do? It will divide either vertically or horizontally. The house will be divided. That is either vertically, that is half of the ground floor, half of the first floor to each of the brothers, or first floor to one brother and ground floor to one brother. But the requirement of the elder brother is he needs the entire house. However, the younger brother does not reside there, but he does not want to leave his entire share in the house. So, but if we see the interests of the parties, now only this is only a hypothetical situation. Now he needs the house. He cannot purchase the share. The elder brother cannot even purchase the entire share of the other party. So in such a situation, what can be done? So the younger brother only comes once or twice to the place, to Hyderabad. So at that time he needs a residence. And the elder brother, he cannot purchase the entire share, but can pay some amount of money as rent or something to the younger brother. So this kind of solution, where the accommodation would be provided whenever the younger brother arrives to Hyderabad, and rent will be paid at certain agreed price to the younger brother by the elder brother till the property is handed over to the first floor, or the property is partitioned by meets and bounds. So this is a collaborative solution. There may be several other options also, where one of the younger brother wants the some other thing from the elder brother, some other requirement from the elder brother. So we are expanding the pie. Now coming to dispute resolution. No, dispute resolution means resolving the dispute completely in order to restore the ideal objective is to restore the parties to their original positions. Or now the definition of justice is very elusive. Now the ultimate objective of any dispute resolution system, as all of you might agree, is to do justice. Now what is justice? Just as our previous speaker, expert Professor TV Subbarao Garu has pointed out, the definition of justice was not even possible to Professor Amartya Sen in his book Idea of Justice. So justice is a very elusive concept, but however justice is also very personal concept. It is very personal, so it is very perspective based. So here the parties may, if we see at the a very simple and Justinian definition of justice, he says that justice is to give any person what he deserves. To give any person what he deserves. Now what he deserves, like apart from God, what he deserves can be decided by courts, and that person himself may decide it. But sometimes what he deserves, he may overestimate or underestimate. That possibility is also there. So the concept of justice, if we see, so dispute resolution, the objective of any dispute resolution is administration of justice, rule of law. So but to do justice is to decide as per the rule of law, or is it to do something more, or is it to get to the expectations of the parties? That is a very very theoretical question, which ponders many academicians ponder upon it. So if we see whether law was enacted for giving justice, or whether what is law comes in next question. Now law can be defined as a codified common sense also, right? And then what is common sense? Common sense is a codified human sense. Now what is this human sense then? So we had dispute resolutions mechanisms since a long time. Since the civilization of mankind, we have histories of the ways in which disputes were resolved in different types of ways. We have the famous story of King Solomon, where two mothers had come in order to resolve a dispute regarding the maternity of the baby. Like each two ladies came to the court of King Solomon, where he asked the parties, like claiming that they are the mother of the child, and both of them were claiming, were very rightly pointing out all the identification marks of the baby, and they were both weeping and pleading the king to give the baby to them, claiming to be the mother of that baby. So the king was in a fix. Now what did he do? He ordered the baby to be divided into two, and each half to be given to each of the mothers. So at the instance of this judgment, at the instance of this order, one lady started wailing out and weeping loudly and pleading the king to give the entire baby to the other lady. So at this, upon noticing this, the king came to the conclusion that the lady who stopped the baby from being cut to be the real mother of the baby. So here, what has been applied, whether it is a rule of law or a matter of wit or common sense, but justice has been done, right? Most of us agree that justice has been done. So similar situations, similar stories are available in the Indian context also. The stories of Maryada Ramanna, Akbar, Birbal, and many, the Upanishads, Puranas, Quran. There are several instances where disputes were resolved basing on wit, and law at that time, even though was not codified, it was something called as a justice was only to give what that person deserves. So this, I will be not dwelling more in this. This is only to point out that the judicial dispute resolution mechanism that is there, the court system that is there, which has been established in India, originally following the English model, is not the only method of achieving justice or doing justice. Now, whether the other, what is the other mode then? Other mode which we have recognized, which has come into vogue and limelight recently, is the alternative dispute resolution model. So what I personally feel is the term judicial dispute resolution the term the term alternative dispute resolution that is there is a misnomer, and this has been pointed out by many of the scholars that actually whether it was the alternative dispute resolution that existed first. In order to name it as alternative, it is as an alternative to JDR that we are claiming it to be. But whether it is really an alternative to JDR or whether was it in existence before the JDR mechanism itself, before the judicial dispute resolution itself, before the court system itself, did we not have panchayats in India? Did we not have other modes of dispute resolution in other places in the world? We definitely had it. There were tribal chieftains who used to decide disputes by different methods. There were panchayat systems in India who decided disputes. And even now, if we see, even though the court system is there, it is generally looked upon as a last resort by the parties, because we have like there is also in a lighter vein, there is a proverb in Telugu which says that కోర్టులో గెలిచిన వాడు ఇంటికెళ్ళి ఏడుస్తాడు, ఓడిపోయిన వాడు కోర్టులో ఏడుస్తాడు. So which that is, in order I translate it in English, the person who has won the case goes home and weeps, and the person who has lost the case weeps in the court hall. So in order to point out the vagaries, the complexities, the delay, the cost ineffectiveness of the judicial dispute resolution system, this is a proverb which was coined. So now dispute resolution systems can be classified into two: judicial dispute resolution and alternative dispute resolution. Judicial dispute resolution can be further classified into the adversarial system of dispute resolution and the inquisitorial system of dispute resolution. Adversarial system is the common law system where there is a neutral judge. There are both parties, plaintiff and defendant, who argue against each other, and judge as a neutral impartial party delivers a judgment. In an inquisitorial system, there are two parties, but the judge plays a more proactive role, the court plays a more proactive role, and this kind of system is visible in the European system, European continent. Now, if we see at the dispute resolution continuum that is there, so along the lines of rule, if we take along a scale, there is litigation on one end, there is negotiation on the other end. Now, litigation is more rule oriented. Decisions are imposed by a third party. Past decisions guide new decisions. Higher cost. It is slower. There is win-lose outcome. These are more adversarial, more formal process, and they are in a public forum, and jurisdiction is important in a litigation. Now, when we shift from this side of the scale, from litigation, when we shift to arbitration, mediation, and negotiation, this becomes less rule-oriented. The agreements are voluntary. Outcomes are based on needs and interests of the parties. The costs become lower, and decisions come out faster. More flexibility is there in outcomes. It is less adversarial. That is, good harmonious relationships can be maintained between the parties. It is a less formal process. It is private, where confidentiality can be maintained, and jurisdiction is less important. So this, on the dispute resolution continuum, if you see, litigation is on one end and negotiation is on the other end of the spectrum. Now, I would like to draw interest of all of you to the case pendency in India. Now, these figures are as on today, which have been taken from the National Judicial Data Grid. Now, in Supreme Court of India, as on the month of July 2020, the pending matters have been 60,444. In the High Courts of India, excluding the High Court of Bombay, 46,42,665 cases are pending. And in the Supreme Court of India, in the district courts and the lower subordinate judiciary, there are 3,38,37,478 cases. That is a total of 3,85,40,587 cases are pending in India. This is the pendency. And apart from this, every year there are cases, humongous number of cases that are being filed throughout the 17,000 courts that are there in India. And in order to add to this, if we look at the other dimension of the judges to population ratio, in India we have courts according to the area, not according to the population. So the judges to population ratio is also very meager, very less in India. So the judges are overburdened, the courts are overburdened, and this is also called as docket explosion, and most of you are well aware about this fact. So here came the significance of alternative dispute resolution, identifying that the existing mechanism of judicial dispute resolution is inefficiently equipped or insufficient to resolve all the disputes. The system of alternative dispute resolution mechanism has come to the forefront, or it has come to the limelight. We have Justice Ahmadi, who has taken the initiative earlier. There was Legal Aid Services Authority, also Lok Adalat, that was established. And I will not go into the details of the history of ADR. So what is this ADR? There are several definitions for ADR also. In order to give a very functional definition of ADR, it is a system of alternatives from formal adjudication. That is an alternative to the judicial dispute resolution mechanism. Or rather than an alternative, I would like to look at it, and most of the scholars would look at it as a supplementary and a complementary mechanism to the existing judicial dispute resolution mechanism. That is, have a multi-door approach. That is, whenever you have a dispute, there are so many possibilities before you. You can go to the court, you can go for negotiation, mediation, or Lok Adalats, or for arbitration. So there are several avenues that are available. It is up to you to which avenue that you will choose. So this is called as the multi-door approach. So it is up to the parties to choose any of the mechanism. And the main factors that are the trump factors, the ace factors of ADR are cost analysis, time analysis, and quality analysis. That it is cost effective, time effective, and quality effective. That is the ideal scenario that is there. Now I will take you briefly through the methods of ADR, different ADR processes. Even the ADR process can be classified into consensual process, advisory processes, adjudicative process, and hybrid processes. Now, consensual processes are where parties need to give consent. Only if the parties' consent is there, such process can be initiated. Negotiation, mediation, and conciliation are consensual process. Advisory process are where the only advice is given to the parties. This may be expert appraisal and early neutral evaluation. Adjudicative process are where the party appoints a judge or a third person, a neutral third party, in order to adjudicate upon the dispute. That is, the third party, that is the arbitrator, gives a final and binding judgment. He does the adjudication. Hybrid processes are a combination of one or more processes, like mini trial, med-arb, that is mediation followed by arbitration if mediation fails. Medola is also a mediation followed by a last option arbitration, where the parties give options to each other, and from among the options, the arbitrator gives the final award. Now, this is an interesting picture which I found very interesting. This is how parties generally view their case. Now, if you look at both the ducks that are there here, or you may call them swans, so they are not so beautiful, I would say. Okay, but however, when they see their own reflection in the water, they see that they are very beautiful. So according to them, their case is very strong. If you see them as both plaintiff and defendant, but when they look at each other, they find the other party to be weak, ugly, or not so strong. And this kind of misconception about self is prevalent in most of the cases. Not all the cases, but most of them. So it is for the when we employ an ADR process, it is for the mediator to, whenever there is a neutral party, it is for the mediator to do it, to make the parties understand their actual position. Or if you are an effective negotiator also, it is in your hands to do it. Now, coming to negotiation. Now, what is negotiation? Negotiation is nothing but when there is a dispute. Generally, there are two parties in a dispute who contest against each other, right? So in negotiation, what happens? The parties, they have a dialogue with each other, where they try to arrive at a settlement by giving concessions or taking concessions from each other. So negotiation also has several definitions. I will not go into it, but the principle for the method of principled negotiation, which was coined by Roger Fisher and William Ury in their famous book of Get to Yes. They are professors of Harvard University. So they evolved 4 basic points of principled negotiation, which focuses on the people, interests, options, and criteria. So what are those 4 principles? Separate the people from the problem. That is, do not see the opposite party, do not have that old baggage, do not have those emotions that are there. You actually focus on the problem. That is, what is the interest and needs of your interest and need. Do not focus on the position, which is just at the top of the pyramid and very small. So interests are focus on interest, not position. Now separate people from the problem and focus on interest, not position. How are they different? Like do not actually see the problem when personally, generally in personal disputes, that is family disputes, labor disputes, or employment disputes, partnership disputes. You need to separate the people from the problem. Next is generate options. Generate a variety of possibilities before deciding what to do. The more number of options you have, the more possibilities to arrive at a collaborative solution, which we discussed earlier. That is resulting in a win-win situation. Next is criteria. Insist that the result be based on some objective standard. So establish a criteria that has to be against which the result has to be measured. Now, negotiation, next method is mediation or conciliation. Now, if you see the literature in India, also the terms mediation and conciliation has been used at different places. So, what is the difference between mediation and conciliation? May be a general question of contention. So, the Justice Jagannath Rao has written a paper on this, the difference between mediation and conciliation. Depending upon in India, mediation is looked upon as a less regulatory kind of a mode of dispute resolution, and conciliation is regulated by the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996, and it is a more facilitative method. However, in a mediation, the mediator does not generate options. In a conciliation, conciliator generates several options and gives the options to the parties in order for them to choose among from those options. However, the situation is quite opposite in USA, where mediation is considered as a more proactive process. But now the difference between mediation and conciliation has been done away by the UNCITRAL international instrument on mediation and also conciliation, where they have been looked upon as synonyms. Even the Supreme Court has, in Afghan's case, the Afghan's infrastructure versus Cherian Warke, has pointed out that mediation and conciliation can be considered to be as synonyms. I will not go much into the details of mediation and conciliation. So, but the process, when actually apply mediation and conciliation, Joseph B. Stelberg, who is also a professor of law, has given the Badger method. That is, begin the discussion. The first thing is to begin the discussion between the parties, what the mediator must do. This is what the mediator must do. Okay. He points out that the mediator should be in control of the process, but not in control of the outcome. He should ascertain that he is always in control of the process, but the parties remain in control of the outcome. That is, they do what they want. Now, beginning the discussion is the first stage. Then accumulating the information. Mediator should accumulate as much information as possible, because basing upon that information only, you can generate a lot of options. Next is developing the agenda and discussion strategies. Now, a mediator also has to develop the agenda, like what should be the direction in which the mediation should proceed. And he should discuss the strategies with the parties. Next is generate movement. Now, there may be a certain kind of flux at some time. There may be parties may be at an impasse. So at that moment, at that point of time, the mediator should generate movement. Escape to private meetings or caucus. That is, the mediator should have private meeting with each of the parties. However, it is always recommended that when you spend some certain amount of time with one party, you always spend the same amount of time with other party. Last one is resolving the conflict. So this is the general standard or ideal procedure. This is also followed by several institutions across the world. Now, coming to mediation and now legal position of negotiation and mediation in India, if we see, negotiation is governed by the Indian Contract Act 1872. That is, it is nothing but like if the parties arrive at a settlement, they can enter into an agreement, which if satisfies all the requirements of a essential and valid contract according to the Indian Contract Act 1872, and there are no vitiating elements of consent that are present in it. That is, if it satisfies section 10 and 11 of the Indian Contract Act, then it could be a valid agreement. Then it would be enforceable agreement. It would be a contract. Contract is enforceable agreement under law. So if there is any breach of contract, you can always file a suit in a court for its enforcement. So that is with respect to negotiation, and negotiation can be initiated by the parties themselves. And coming to mediation or conciliation, mediation is actually, there are no specific rules for a specific law for mediation in India. Mediation, there is a law on mediation which is on anvil. It is under discussion, and we may soon have a law on mediation in India. However, there are rules that were framed by the Supreme Court and also the High Courts under the Salem Advocates Bar Association case, and the MCPC committee, MCPC committee has also given guidelines for the accreditation of the mediators in India. Now, conciliation is governed by the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996. And if you have a conciliation agreement that is there, then it is considered as a arbitral award on agreed terms, and it is equivalent to a decree of a court and enforceable as a decree under the by the Indian courts under the Indian judicial system. Okay, so this is with respect to the legal position of mediation and conciliation. Now, with respect to initiation of mediation and conciliation or negotiation, the parties may initiate these processes by themselves, or the court under section 89 of CPC may direct the parties to go for either mediation or conciliation or negotiation. And apart from this, the court may also tell the parties to go for arbitration, lok adalat also. I will be coming to it in the next part of the session. Now, in the mediation models, there are two models. Now, the Indian model is voluntary or opt-in model of mediation. So here, what we do, if there is a dispute, the parties may have two options. You can see in the chart. That is, one option is litigation, okay, and the other option is mediation. So parties may voluntarily opt for mediation, or the court may exercise discretion under section 89 to refer the parties to mediation. So, and this may result in a settlement of the dispute by the parties, or it may result in, if there is no settlement, then the parties may go to court. So here, if you see, the parties have an option to go for mediation, and even under section 89 CPC, if the court imposes to go for mediation, that is after post litigation, that is the dispute first goes to litigation, then comes to mediation. So in Italy, there is another model of mediation that is there. So that is the opt-out model of mediation. Now, what is this opt-out model of mediation? Whenever there is a dispute, okay, there is a mandatory preliminary mediation session. So our acts also have started to include this. The Commercial Courts Act of 2015 has included a pre-litigation mediation. If you want to go for an interim urgent order, you need to compulsorily go for mediation. If the mediation fails only, you can go to the commercial court. So in the opt-out model, you have the option to go out of mediation, but mandatorily you should go for mediation. Opt-in is not there. There is no option to come into mediation. There is option only to go out of mediation. So here what happens, you need to come whenever there is a dispute, mandatorily you have to go for preliminary mediation session. This session generally is for 3 sessions, not just one namesake session, 3 sessions, and there is a minimal fees for this. And if you do not go for this session, there is sanctions that are there. So, and if the parties decide to continue, so after the mandatory sessions, if the parties decide to continue for mediation, then they may arrive at a settlement, or they may not arrive at a settlement. Or if the parties do not decide to continue, they may opt out, but there is no sanction. So if you opt out, there may be the confidentiality of the mediation is maintained. The whatever has happened remains confidential, and there is no punishment for either party for not being successful in mediation or opting out of mediation. Then they go to litigation. So it is like a filter. So whatever disputes are there, they are being filtered at this level of mediation, and only the remaining disputes that are there, they are going to litigation. This is with respect to negotiation and mediation. Now coming to arbitration. Now, what is arbitration? Now there are for arbitration also there are several definitions that are there. I'm not going to go into the concept of arbitration, but as similarly, if we look at a functional definition, the arbitration is a process in which the decision is given by a private judge. Okay, both the parties appoint a person as a neutral, impartial third party as a judge, and he gives a decision, and such decision is as rendered as a award, which is binding on both the parties. So even arbitration is a private process; it is also an ADR process. And the significance of arbitration compared to judicial dispute resolution is that there may be chances of maintenance of confidentiality, maintenance of the speedy delivery of decisions, and cost effectiveness. That is a little bit arguable because we have now 5-star arbitrations are there. There are a lot of criticisms. We'll not go into that now. So moving ahead, now coming to growth of technology. Now this whatever I have told till now is the entire bird's eye view of the dispute resolution system that are there, and the basic core points of the methods of dispute resolution. I would like to quote Bob Taylor, who was the creator of the ARPANET, that is the precursor to the internet, the first person. In fact, initially, internet was created for academic purpose in order to share information between universities. Later on, it became commercial. So that was the ARPANET earlier. So he gives his opinion on computers. He said that computers were first born as arithmetic engines, but my own view and the view of some other people as well is that they are much more interesting and powerful as communication devices because they mediate human to human communication. So he emphasizes the role of computers as the mediators of or as interfaces of human to human communication. Now, if you look at the current rate of growth of technology across the globe, 4.57 billion people are active users of internet. That is 59% of the global population is using internet. So this is not technology but internet. So 560 million internet users are there in India. India stands at second position. First position is China. 850 million internet users are there in China. So as of April 2020, this data is as of April 2020, 2 billion WhatsApp users have been recorded. And in India, however, even though there is high rate of internet users, high number of internet users, the internet penetration is only around 50%. That is even now in rural areas, etc., there is a lack of internet penetration that is there. I would also like to point out the remark of the World Bank, the report of the World Bank, which says that even in India, even where in India and most of the developing countries, even where there is no water, there is a mobile phone with internet that is there. So that is the reach of the internet. Now coming to online dispute resolution. So if we look at now, as I have pointed out earlier, the dispute resolution mechanisms can be divided into ADR and JDR. That is judicial court system and the ADR system, alternative dispute resolution or appropriate dispute resolution system. So online dispute resolution system is the dispute resolution that is supported or facilitated or helped by the use of technology. That is the definition given by Ethan Cash, who is the father of who is considered as the father of ODR. Now, the simple definition of ODR would be ICT plus ADR, that is alternative dispute resolution. And if technology is employed exhaustively in alternative dispute resolution, such a method may be called as online dispute resolution. Now, there are UNCITRAL technical notes on online dispute resolution which have been enacted in 2016, which gives a definition of ODR as a mechanism for resolving disputes through the use of electronic communications and other information and communication technology. So very wide definition. So different kinds of processes are possible under ODR. Different methods are possible under ODR. So if you see, online courts is a different concept. ODR is a different concept. ODR is mostly associated with resolving disputes through use of electronic communications and other information and communication technology. But generally, it is concerned with the ADR plus ICT. Online courts are judicial dispute resolution plus ICT. Now, a brief history of ODR. ODR actually started prior to 1995. So under the University of at that time it is referred to as the hobbyist phase. That is, pre-1995. Before 1995, if you see, there was still at that time also, even though the internet and the computer were still in its infancy, in this period, ODR did not exist as a proper formal mechanism, but the first internet disputes arose during this period. An informal form of ODR mechanism were used to resolve them. So, because even the online forum or the virtual space or the cyber space as it is called is also a space of communication. There are disputes that happen even in the online space. So there were lists or moderators which were the some early ODR providers. Next, from 1995 to 1998, it is called as the experimental phase. During this period, more and more online disputes started to appear, and the first ODR initiatives were started, like the virtual magistrate project, that is the online court project, online ombuds office in order to resolve small value of disputes, and Maryland family mediation project in order to do the mediation of disputes, mediation of particularly family disputes. Then from 1998 to 2002, what was observed in this experimental phase was it was very successful. Quite a number of disputes were resolved, and for the first time in eBay, you may be aware of the e-commerce provider eBay. The ODR was first. eBay ODR pilot project was started, and it was a huge success at that time, because generally the e-commerce disputes are marked by the quality of high volume. The number of disputes are more, and low value, the value of the disputes is less. So such kind of disputes could be very effectively settled to the ODR. Otherwise, those disputants generally used to keep quiet. They used to not, they did not have, for such a small amount of dispute, they could not go to the consumer fora or the courts, and those disputes were left unresolved. So ODR provided the dispute resolution for such kind of disputes for which there was no effective dispute resolution at that time. So as a result of this, SquareTrade and CyberSettle, these ODR providers started emerging, and they also, and we all at that time we could also see the application of ODR by ICANN. You know, the domain name dispute resolution that is there, ICANN, and also the online small claims court started at that time. So ODR mechanism was looked upon as the desired process or first choice for providing a solution to problems that originate in the online environment. So eBay is e-commerce, ICANN is also domain disputes. So what was observed in that stage was, if there is an online dispute, there should be an online mode of dispute resolution, because if the parties have decided to transact online, it would be most appropriate to provide the dispute resolution system also online. So next stage was from 2002 to the present stage, that is the institutional phase. That is where the ODR institutions came into being, and public institutions also started adopting ODR. So this phase marked the adoption of the ODR programs by public bodies, leading to formalization, institutionalization of ODR. That is, as of March 2006 itself, in March 2006 itself, 149 ODR services were launched worldwide. And however, over the course of time, some of them have shut down, but most of them are still continuing. Some prominent ODR providers are Modria, modular ODR provider. So it was it was run by Colin Rule, who actually was at the helm of the eBay ODR pilot project. Then we have the British Columbia Civil Tribunal is there, and we also have Eustace EU ODR platform, European Union ODR platform. So this is the institutional phase. So we are now in institutional phase of online dispute resolution. So what is this role of the technology in ODR? So Ethan Katz and Janet Refkin in their book on online dispute resolution have pointed out the role of technology as the fourth party. Generally what we see in mediation, we have three parties, two disputants and one third impartial neutral party. So here ODR is seen as the fourth party because it does a lot more. Technology is seen as a fourth party because it does a lot more significant functions in ODR. So there are basic methods of ODR are blind bidding or automated negotiation method. So whenever you have a dispute, the flow of ODR is such: first, if you have a dispute, you go to an ODR provider. He does the blind bidding or automated negotiation, where there are two parties to a dispute. If there is only dispute with respect to quantum of the price, quantum of the amount to be paid, quantum of compensation, both the parties submit a blind bid to the computer. The computer gets numbers from both the sides and gives a arithmetic mean as the solution to both the parties. Next is assisted negotiation. Assisted negotiation is where in like this Google Meet or virtual asynchronous or synchronous form of communication between the parties on the ODR platform. Next is online mediation, where accredited mediators are there. They provide a list of mediators and parties can select mediators, and he does the mediation, which is completely online. And then we have the online arbitration, where arbitrator does the arbitration, which is completely online, and even the award that is given is also completely online. Now, what are the requirements of the online dispute resolution? What are the prerequisites of an effective ODR? They are awareness. First of all, first requirement is the awareness among the disputants, among the parties, and also among the advocates, among the judges, among the arbitrators, among the mediators. Awareness is essential. Second is the technological tools. Third is strong internet. And the fourth and the most important factor is mutual trust. Now, generating trust in an online environment is very difficult. So that is why Thomas Schultz, who is also one of the major proponent of ODR, signifies on the importance of the role of government as a symbolic capital in order to generate that trust in the ODR mechanism. So he emphasizes on a regulatory mechanism, a regulatory body which gives out the standards that should be followed by any of the ODR provider. Only if such standards are met, then he should be accredited as a ODR provider. Secured channels, data privacy, data security is very much important. So we can emulate the models of the online banking methods. Trained professionals should be there, like professionals like you, like me, who should be there, who are capable of not only doing mediation, arbitration, but also doing it online. User-friendly platforms, that is, there is possibility of using even local languages, and enforceability of outcomes. This is another most important aspect. So for media, how do we enforce this? There should be recognition of these kind of outcomes that are arrived in a online environment. Now, next, coming to the benefits of ODR. Now, what are the benefits of ODR? So first is it is held online. So what is happening if it is held online? It is enabling access to justice. That is what is argued by most of the proponents of ODR. There is possibility of asynchronous communication. That is, both the parties need not be at the same place at the same time. They can communicate by way of emails. They can communicate by way of chat. So many possibilities are there. If you know, if you see the recent development, WeChat, that is there, the China has used WeChat to resolve so many disputes since 2017. Millions of disputes were resolved using only a chat application. Next is the speed, fast, cost effective, because a lot of costs are saved, not traveling, time saving, etc. And increased access to justice. Now coming to online courts. Now this is ODR, online disputation, online courts. Now Richard Susskind has been the major proponent of online courts. In fact, if you see, Professor Susskind is a professor of law at Oxford University. In 1985 itself, he had done a dissertation, PhD he has done on the area of artificial intelligence and law. So at that time itself, since then he has been a strong proponent of technological inducement in law and the impact of technology in law. If you also see the growth of technology, the rate at which there has been an exponential growth of technology. That is, for every 2 years, the technology power is doubling. And also, in every 3 days, the number of content that is being generated online is getting doubled. Your YouTube videos, our online meeting, your mails, etc., etc. So he emphasizes that this influence of technology is always there on the courts also. Court cannot escape the influence of technology. And in order to maintain proper administration of justice, effective dispute resolution, court should be as a service, should be looked upon as a service, but not a place where parties have to come or where the judge has come and sit. But it should be a service which should be provided, which should be accessible, and technology should be employed in order to provide court as a service, but not a place. That is his main idea. His book, he has written a book on online courts and future of justice in 2019. It is available even on Amazon. So he says that infusing technology, not just grafting technology only superficially in order to accelerate the process of just like scanning the documents, etc., but infusing it in such a manner that it becomes a core component of the courts, where filing can be done, where judges can listen online, and decisions can be rendered online. It can be given by way of email, and those are enforceable as decrees. So it enables access to justice. Now the example is, there is the Her Majesty's online court in England, that is there since in 2015. There was a report that was given by the committee, and it is functioning now. And China's first internet court was established in Hangzhou in 2017. And if you see recently, since 2019, there have been in China, there are judges based using artificial intelligence technologies. Decisions are being rendered by those judges. Cyber courts and verdicts and chat apps are used in China to give decisions. So what are the kinds of disputes that are being used for? These are online trade disputes, copyright cases, and e-commerce product liability claims. Now let us look at the components of the legal dimensions of this ODR, online dispute resolution, in the international scenario. Now the first development, looking at the significance of ODR. Now we saw the history of ODR. It started pre-1995 itself. Now looking at the significance, that it has come into an institutional phase since 2009. The working group of UNCITRAL, working group 3 was established. Even India is a member of that group. In 2010, since 2010 itself, it has been working. And in 2016, it has given technical notes on online dispute resolution. And these are only guidelines which can be adopted in order to maintain uniformity across. You all may be aware of UNCITRAL, that it works on harmonization of laws which have cross-border impact in order to maintain effective resolution of disputes and also effective cross-border transactions. Now, similarly, if you see, UNCITRAL model law on international commercial arbitration was the basic model, was the basis for enactment of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996, and also the UNCITRAL model law on e-commerce was the basis for enactment of the Information and Technology Act 2000. So this is one of the major striking developments in the domain of ODR internationally, the legal in a legal dimension. Next is the United Nations Convention on International Settlement Agreements resulting from mediation 2018. This is also called as the Singapore Convention on Mediation. Just in 2020, the requisite number of countries have ratified to it. India has not yet ratified. So it has also come into force since 2020, I think, if I am not wrong. So this, what does this do? This gives enforceability of mediation settlement agreements that are arrived by between the international parties, like parties from two different countries. If they arrive at a mediation settlement agreement also, it is equivalent to a decree of a court, just like our New York Convention is there, which gives recognition and enforceability to arbitral awards. This is on those lines, gives recognition to mediation settlement agreements. Next is the United Nations Convention on Use of Electronic Communication in International Contracts. So there is a convention which gives recognition to electronic communications in international contracts. That is, electronic agreements, electronic signatures, electronic email, etc. are recognized. So what I mean to emphasize here is that the framework of ODR, which is completely online, comes under the legal dimensions. So next is UNCITRAL model on international commercial mediation and international settlement agreements. So they similar, the convention also has a model law basing upon which countries can enact their own enactments in order to maintain harmonization of all the laws across different countries. Next, we have the UNCITRAL arbitration rules 2013. So these rules were revised from earlier rules, and these rules contain even electronic communication as a significant part, and they gave recognition to electronic communication. Next, we have the British Columbia Civil Resolution Tribunal Act 2012. This is considered by the proponents of ODR as the first enactment to have officially and legislatively recognize the online dispute resolution. So in this enactment, there is a procedure where the parties are first go to the ODR is done, that is the online negotiation, online mediation is done. Then they go to a tribunal. This is only for a small claim dispute, and this tribunal is also fully online. That is, the judge is it is a virtual court kind of setting, and this tribunal gives a judgment which is again enforceable. There is also EU regulation on online dispute resolution for consumer dispute 2013. Now this regulation has come into force from 2015. So here this focuses more on consumer disputes and particularly e-commerce transactions. Now in European Union, if you want to have a e-commerce website, it is essential that you provide online dispute resolution, and it should be displayed on a conspicuous place of your website that you are providing ODR, and if the parties have any kind of dispute, they can resort to such kind of they can go click on that link and go to the provider and register their dispute or register their claim. So it is mandatory. Now coming to legal dimensions in India, there is no specific law on ODR in India, but however, the Information Communication and Technology Act 2000 gives recognition to electronic signatures, electronic communication, attribution of electronic record, recognition of electronic record is there. And coming to Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996, recent amendment in 2015 under the Section 7 of the Arbitration Agreement has included the electronic agreement, electronic means of communication is also valid arbitration agreement. Even prior to that, there have been Supreme Court judgments in Shakti Bhog versus Union of India, etc., where the electronic email exchange of emails was also recognized as a valid arbitration agreement. And coming to Indian Evidence Act, after the Information Technology Act 2000 was enacted, the consequential amendments were made to the Indian Evidence Act, where electronic evidence has been recognized. Some sections were amended. So now, even I do not remember the exact judgment, but the Supreme Court has given a judgment that even a certificate is not required for admission of a electronic evidence. Now coming to Commercial Courts Act 2015, it provides for a pre-litigation mediation. Consumer Protection Act 2019 recognizes mediation. There is a separate chapter on mediation in that act. Now e-courts project. Now if you see e-courts project, the e-committee of the judiciary was established in December 2004. Later it led to the inception of the e-courts project. We are now in the third phase, e-courts project 3.0. The 17,000 courts in India are now digitalized. The data from different cases is now available on the e-courts website, district wise, everything. There is NJDG, National Judicial Database, which provides the number of pending cases, etc. And the time is right for where we can have an online court also. Okay. Next is the Department of Justice in 2017 had given a notification recognizing online dispute resolution providers. This was a notification which was directed towards the government departments in order to opt for ODR if they have any kind of dispute. And recently, a circular has been given by RBI where it has mandated for the ODR for digital payments. The circular is dated recently, quite a few days back, 6th August 2020. The circular was given, and according to this, for digital payments, the UPI and the BHIM, there needs to be an ODR provider. Now the circular is very detailed. Anyone who is interested can type it on Google and go through the circular. Now coming to the emerging trends, in April 2020, the Supreme Court of India has issued standard operating procedures for virtual hearings in India. Even before this, there were virtual hearings for taking evidence by the court from the prison system, from the prisons, like there was video conferencing. There are several judgments also which have recognized such things. And now even for e-filings, there are SOPs that were issued. Supreme Court has launched e-filing module. So not only in the Supreme Court, but also in the district courts in prominent cities, and also the high courts, the e-filing is being done, and urgent cases are being taken now owing to the Corona pandemic that is there, COVID-19 pandemic. This is the recent development that is there. And in India, there are ODR providers. Sama is there. It was earlier ODR-Base, which is providing ODR to the ICICI Bank to resolve their disputes. There is Peacegate app of IIM, Indian Institute of Arbitration and Mediation. And Agami is another company which is taking up initiatives for funding startups which are focused on providing ODR. There are other ODRs also. There is Just Act, JUST-ACT. Just Act is there. There are ODR. There is ODR-Base is there, and there is RDO, Resolving Dispute Online. There are several startups also that are coming up.
Very good evening, sir. It was a very nice session for everyone. And Mr. Prabhakar Rao, who is asking that what are the importance of tribunal? Its award is being challenged in appellate tribunal.
No, I would like for more clarity in that question, like which tribunal is it actually? But however, any tribunal is subservient to the jurisdiction of the High Court and the Supreme Court. Like always the High Court and Supreme Court have that authority to decide over a tribunal. No, that I don't. Chandrakumar, just the Chandrakumar case has laid down that the Supreme Court, the High Court will not lose jurisdiction over a tribunal.
How can we encourage more alternative dispute resolution process of justice delivery system?
So how can we encourage? Now, first of all, because this is a teaching learning workshop, what I feel is that even our teaching is more adversarial system induced. The teaching also, like there is a need for attitudinal change in perception of ADR as an effective means of dispute resolution. It is not something which is at a lower grade or which is something less than the judicial dispute resolution mechanism. It is not something that ADR does not give justice. There are articles, if you search on Google, like whether ADR does justice, there are articles on of scholars which point out that ADR shall not be looked down upon. So that attitudinal change is required. So how we encourage? One is through the change of attitude that can happen only by increasing awareness of the parties. Now, in a lighter vein, there may be advocates also here. I am also an advocate. ADR is also defined as advocates deficit in revenue. Okay, so even advocates have a need to change their attitude towards ADR. And how we can encourage more? We can encourage our students first of all, then change the attitude of the advocates towards it. And because it has inherent benefits, gradually it will scale up.
Dr. Bharti Era, who is asking that in lower courts, more cases are getting compromised in Lok Adalats, where compared to the mediation and counseling, what are the reasons for less case settlements through these modes?
Now, Lok Adalat is a mode of dispute resolution which is unique in India. Like it can be referred as actually the process that is followed in a Lok Adalat is mediation or conciliation that is done by the district judge of that district, right? So compromising in Lok Adalats is happening more because people tend to look for authority. Like even though a mediation session is generally, mediators are not judges and mediators are not people of high accomplishments, may not be. So in such cases, because in Lok Adalats what happens is there is a national Lok Adalat day that is there, or a state Lok Adalat day, and on that mega Lok Adalats we have, on that day the courts are referred to the Lok Adalat, and Lok Adalat gives an award which is equivalent to decree of a, and that award is on agreed terms. There is no appeal against the decree of the Lok Adalat. First of all, if you want me to point out actually why more and why less, maybe because the people, the general public is looking for a person in more authority to resolve their dispute, even by way of mediation. Or maybe mediators which are doing counseling is different from mediation. Counseling is where they only counsel the parties, where a psychologist or advocates counsel the parties. They try to do them, convince them in order to withdraw their case or compromise on certain matters. It may not be effective way of mediation also, which may be the consequence. And in Lok Adalats, because generally people go to Lok Adalat after they have made up their mind to settle. Lok Adalat is generally as an avenue to obtain a decree from the Lok Adalat so that it is final and binding. So I think that answers the question.
From Mr. Muthu Kumar. So first of all, appreciating you, sir, for the nice presentation. And then asking that why Gram Nyayalaya Act could not materialize in India, as it provides both conciliation and adjudication proceedings at the doorsteps of litigants.
Yes, actually a very good question. And if you see, like you can search it on the internet also. Our Professor G.B. Reddy Garu has also written an article on this, on the significance of Gram Nyayalaya Act in ADR. it actually it is a very nice initiative that is there, that is in place. And it I like in order to, I remember the words of my Professor Jayakumar, who says that even though the mechanism is good, like even though the car is good, if the drivers are not good, then it is not possible to drive it effectively. So there is a change in attitude that is needed, and maybe there needs to be more life, more emphasis that needs to be made on the Gram Nyayalayas.
Ms. Neha Agarwal. So
Oh.
she's asking, as we know, government is one of the biggest litigant and adds to
Yes.
bulk of pending cases.
Yes.
Why government itself hesitate to opt for ADR for earlier resolution of these cases?
Yes. Very good question, Neha. Now, actually, like as Neha has correctly pointed out, government it may be in contractual disputes. There are a lot of government contracts in which there are mediation, there are arbitration clauses, and challenges are made before the High Court against it or Supreme Court against it. And even in cases with respect to salaries, with respect to pensions, etc., government may go for appeal against decisions which are against it, and also may litigate claims which are clear. So here the government need not looking at considering government to be more people friendly, or ideally, that is ideally it should be people friendly or less litigation friendly. But considering the government not just a minute. Considering the government to be more resolution friendly would be naivety. Like it would be just outright naivety. Now, why government is not going? Because even government has vested interest, right? Government, state is again there are people behind the curtain of uh, the wheel of state. So, however, introducing this now, the Supreme Court has now the recent amendment to the Arbitration and Conciliation Act has mandated that under 7th schedule it is given an appointment of arbitrators. They cannot be CMDs, they cannot be directors of that contract of that department, etc. And they cannot be persons nominated by those persons in official positions. Also, it should be some neutral person. So maybe that way it will do some good. And it's not always nice to expect more from government. It would be naivety.
From Mr. Muthukumar. So what he is asking is whether the online dispute resolution will be useful to all the sections of people, because the institutional phase that you have referred concentrate only on a certain sections.
Okay. Muthukumar sir, like now whether ODR will be acceptable to all the sections of a society. Now, general criticism towards ODR has been that in order to have ODR, the public or the aggrieved person should be tech savvy. That is, they should have technological literacy, not just literacy, technological literacy, and also they should have access to technology and internet. So if you see, as I have pointed out earlier in my lecture, only there is internet penetration of only 50%. So if we now looking at this argument, if you see A to Z are the population or the subject matter of people, and A and B have access to it, and X, Y, and Z do not have access, then there is always the regular court. I am not advocating for removal of the existing court system. There is a need for a hybrid model where there is a combination of online and offline courts, where there is a bench or where there are benches that are working online, and where there is regular court also going on. Now, in this COVID-19 pandemic, there is no the existence of physical courts has diminished. But after this also, what I emphasize, or what most of the proponents and what even our Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, who is the head of the E-Committee project of Supreme Court, he also emphasizes that we cannot go back now. We cannot just, because Corona is over now, we cannot just shut down online courts, and we cannot just stop ODR. Now let us cater to that section of people who can access it. Then we have resources that are more open. Now the court is less burdened because these disputes are being looked upon by different set of mechanism, and this the people who cannot access this online system, they can, their availability or the resources can be focused on the people who cannot access it. The regular court can focus more on it. So, and institutional phase is only like that marks the phase. From then there are yes, ODR initially now is looking at only civil disputes. It is not looking at criminal disputes, and even in criminal cases, petty offenses. Now if you see, most of us, like even me, we might have got a challan from the traffic department, like the photo, along with the photo you receive a photo of violation of your traffic signal, and along with it there is a amount of challan which you can pay, and beneath that it is written, if you observe, that if you are not satisfied, or if you feel that this is not correct, then you can approach the appropriate tribunal or court, so and so police station or court. So this is also one form of ODR only. And even now in Tamil Nadu also there is, for electricity bills, you can, if there is any dispute, there is a, you can do online only, you can give a complaint, etc. There is a core system, CORE, core, for consumers, that is there, which is already an online method of resolving disputes. Now eBay resolves disputes for 60 million disputes per year now. That is the record. Now, as you are saying that we are focusing on disputes that are arising online, e-commerce disputes, and low value disputes, small claim disputes, or disputes which have a general kind of pro forma, like check bounce cases, money default in payment of money, chit fund cases, motor vehicle accidents, etc., insurance claims. So, but in order to look at the more complex matters, we have the regular courts. And because these cases are decided in an effective way by ODR, the regular court has more time and resources to resolve the other more complex matters.
Thank you for answering all the questions. So now I would like to take the privilege of proposing vote of thanks on behalf of University College of Law. At the same time, I also like to apologize for not enabling the camera because of the technical issue. Apologies for that. So, sir, I would like to take this privilege for thanking you for being here, for being the organizer, being the resource person, and your content was very nice. In my view, the content and the PPT that you have prepared was the best till now, what we have seen. I think most of the participants would agree to my statement. And you are the one of the resource persons, sir, who had actually had a very warm welcome by all the participants before the session has started. And your PowerPoint presentation was really powerful. So with a lot of interactive content, and finally, we can say that you have made a long stretched Sunday, which is also known as a lazy day session, more worth for academic point of view, from the academic point of view. And very importantly, we could hold the participants till this time, which is very much relevant to say that your content was really interesting. And there were a lot of other questions, and because of the time constraint, we could not take up more than this 6 questions. So thank you for sharing your knowledge, sir, and experience to all of us. And that's all from us. So on behalf of University College of Law, Osmania University, I would like to thank you, and thanks all the participants for being with us since 3 p.m. today till this time. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you, Srinivas Garu, and also thank you to all the participants. And however, it would be not right on my part to thank my guru, my guide for my PhD, Professor S. Sripati Dwarkanath Garu, and also my mentor in ADR, Professor Jaikumar sir, and my mentor at Osmania University, and even with whom I have been doing many projects, Professor G.B. Reddy Garu. I would like to thank my teachers, not excluding others, but particularly these teachers, and also to the participants for their patient hearing. Thank you very, very much. And thank you to Professor Vinod Kumar sir for giving me this opportunity and for giving me a session in the workshop where I could express myself. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vinod sir.